How many times does a private investigator truly uncover someone cheating during an investigation? The answer to this question may come as a huge surprise to you. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a private investigator? Go ahead, let me know in the comments below. Now, when I ask people this question, the majority of the time, I get answers like this. A middle-aged guy wearing a hat and a trench coat, lurking in the shadows, spying on people just like what you see on television and in the movies. For the most part, the private investigations industry, yes, it is an industry, has shifted to a profession to be proud to be part of. In fact, I often refer to myself as a professional investigator or a professional legal investigator instead of just a private investigator. Back in 2008, in fact, I started looking at the opportunities available for me to become a private investigator, and I found what I believe to be the perfect gig for me, my forever job until the good Lord calls me. I started out doing mostly workers' comp and personal injury surveillance jobs, but I also received some other jobs from clients regarding legal matters as well as some fraud cases and even some infidelity cases. Now, infidelity cases can be the bread and butter type of cases for many PI businesses. I know many surveillance investigators that work those workers' comp and personal injury cases in the daytime and then cheating spouse cases at night. It seems to be a pretty good fit for a lot of PIs. I know when I started, I got quite a bit of work involving these workers' comp and personal injury cases, but it wasn't enough to keep me busy 40 plus hours a week. So when I branched out, I started getting calls for infidelity type cases quite a bit. And to begin with, I really didn't want to take them on. It just seemed, well, kind of dirty, and it involved night work, and I was a family man. And, well, in Colorado, for the most part, there is not a lot of legal bearing regarding infidelity when it comes to divorce settlements. In Colorado, it is a no-fault divorce state, meaning anyone can file for divorce for any reason or no reason, and infidelity or other bad behavior are not considered by the court in many cases. However, I have discovered over time there are some caveats to that rule, to be sure. For instance, if that infidelity is occurring in the presence of children and negatively affecting the children, a court may consider this when deciding child custody situations. As well, if the infidelity leads to illegal behavior, drug usage or drinking and driving and other things, this can affect a court's decision, especially in regard to child custody. I also discovered early on that most of the calls I would get were regarding infidelity matters, and I soon realized I was leaving a lot of money on the table for my competitors to pick up. Yes, we do have competition, to be sure, and if you let them take the ball, they will run with it, folks. So you have to make prudent decisions when it comes to what jobs you will and will not take. Now, I don't take on every infidelity case that comes to me. In fact, I usually only consider the ones that either have children involved, so it becomes more of a child custody case, or ones involving more affluent clients who have a lot to lose if things go wrong in the divorce or the separation. Now, what are some of those traditional indicators that someone is having an affair or being unfaithful? This is something that you need to know about when you go into these types of investigations. It's all about the little things, folks. Consider the following scenarios. Someone who always has their phone facing up, and suddenly their phone is always facing down. Or they have changed their password or PIN and they suddenly become secretive or protective about that information. Maybe they just start carrying their electronic gadgets, their cell phone, their tablet, their laptops with them everywhere they go. Possibly they've just begun going to the gym on the spur of the moment in an attempt to impress someone else. Alternatively, they may be working late nights and arriving home and immediately taking a shower, which is not generally part of their normal routine. I had a case one time where the client became highly suspicious after he found out his wife suddenly took up bowling. Yep, bowling, and they had never been bowling together in their life. The client and his wife had been married for about 10 years, had several young children, were church-going folk involved in the neighborhood. They were homeowners, had a dog, 2 cats, and everything seemed hunky-dory, living the dream. Then the client started having difficulty contacting his wife during her lunch hour at work. Now, she worked a regular 9-to-5 type of job, had a set schedule, and was very predictable. But on occasion, he needed to have her pick up the kids from daycare, and she never answered her phone when she would have normally been on lunch. And her answer to him was always that her and some work friends went out to lunch and she forgot her cell phone at the office. But after this happened a few times, and after her suddenly wanting to go bowling a lot, he had hired us to see if she was in fact being truthful. Well, we were able to collect the dates, the times, and other pieces of data from the client and put together a timeline of events, and we saw a pattern of behavior. We then were able to devise a plan of attack and schedule some surveillance on opportune days and at opportune times. Our findings were that she was indeed having lunch with a friend from work. However, her friend was a male. Her friend was also highly interested in bowling, and her friend was an old high school friend from years ago. After presenting the evidence of this to the client, he had all of the ammo that he needed to proceed as he saw best to proceed. In this case, his intent was to try to salvage their marriage, and he confronted her with the evidence in the presence of a marriage counselor that he had hired. And to the best of my knowledge, they are still together, faithfully living their dream. But the big question is, how many times does this happen? How many times do we actually find evidence proving infidelity? I know in my experience, folks, this is the outcome more times than not. Yep, and I find that to be disturbing, but then not so surprising either. As a general rule, if the client suspects something is happening, then most times their suspicions are found to be true. But wait, there are those times when that is not the case. I have seen this many times in my career where the client was absolutely positively, without a doubt, sure their spouse was cheating. Then after we complete the investigation and we have provided the evidence as it was presented to us as the finders of the fact, the client states something like, well, nothing happened this time. Yep, in most instances, not all to be sure, when we do not find any signs of infidelity, the client usually chalks it up to, it didn't happen this time. And in many of those cases, the client hires us again. In fact, we have had cases where we were hired a dozen or more times over a period of time to try to prove it was happening. And sometimes, again, not all the time, but sometimes we do get the goods, get the evidence, get the money shot on rounds 2, 3, 4, or more of surveillance. But is it worth it to the client to invest that much into finding out if their suspicions are true or not? That is the big question for them, the client, to answer for themselves many times. But here is an even bigger secret involving most infidelity case inquiries, folks. Most times we have found it is more often than not a female client who is trying to determine if their male partner is being disloyal. Yes, we do get calls from men to be sure, but most of the time it is the woman who has these suspicions. And here is another huge surprise for you. Most of the time when we have a male client, we discover that his wife or female partner is not being unfaithful. However, when the tables are turned, when we have a female client, we discover her suspicions to be true. Again, not in all cases, but more so than not. I would venture to guess, and this is a fairly educated guess based on the many cases we have seen, that all in all, we find our client's suspicions of adultery or infidelity are founded 70% of the time. And of that 30% of the time we did not prove infidelity, we were not able to disprove it either, probably another 70%. So, out of 100 cases, 70 cases would discover evidence proving infidelity, and of the remaining 30, about 9 or 10, we were able to reasonably assure the client there is nothing happening. Now the big question, how do you reasonably assure the client there is nothing happening? There is, of course, no way to prove that nothing is happening, period, and that is it. However, if we have done sufficient surveillance and investigation and show the client that their spouse's alibis are legitimate, then there is a good chance nothing is happening. In fact, I have had cases where we discovered the client's spouse was seeing a marriage counselor on their own because they felt the client was being unfaithful or there were other underlying issues in the relationship. And we have even had cases where the client hired us to see if their spouse was cheating on them, while we discovered, in fact, that our client was cheating on the spouse themselves. But that is a story for another time. Now, if you would like to take a little trip with me on an actual surveillance case that I recently conducted, then check out this video.